The stagecoach lurched violently as Sarah Kinsley heard the sharp crack of gunfire split the afternoon air, her heart hammering against her ribs as she clutched the worn leather seat beneath her trembling fingers. She had been traveling for 3 days through the New Mexico territory, her journey from Kansas City taking her through some of the most unforgiving landscapes she had ever witnessed. It was late September in 1878, and the high desert stretched endlessly in all directions, punctuated by mazes and scrub brush that offered little comfort to weary travelers. Sarah had come west seeking a new life, fleeing the suffocating expectations of her family back east, who wanted nothing more than to see her married off to a banker twice her age. At 22, she had decided her fate belonged in her own hands, not in the grip of tradition and duty. The stagecoach driver, an older man named Pete who had weathered skin like tanned leather, shouted something incomprehensible from his perch. Sarah leaned toward the window, her auburn hair coming loose from its pins as the coach hit another rut in the primitive road. Through the dusty glass, she could see what had caused Pete's alarm. 4 men on horseback blocked the narrow passage between 2 towering rock formations, their faces covered with bandanas, rifles raised and pointed directly at the approaching stagecoach. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had heard stories of stage robberies, of course, but had never truly believed she would find herself in such a situation. The other passenger, a whiskey drummer who had spent most of the journey sleeping off his own product, suddenly sat bolt upright, his bloodshot eyes widening with terror. Pete began pulling on the reins, slowing the 6-horse team as was expected when confronted by armed bandits. The horses whinnied and stamped, sensing the tension in the air. Sarah watched as the 4 men spread out slightly, clearly experienced in this particular brand of villainy. Her hands went instinctively to the small carpet bag at her feet, which contained nearly everything she owned in this world, including the modest inheritance her grandmother had left her, carefully hidden in the lining. The stagecoach was perhaps 50 yards from the armed men when Sarah heard something that changed everything. The thunder of hooves approaching from behind, rapid and purposeful. She twisted in her seat, craning her neck to see through the rear window, and caught a glimpse of a massive figure on horseback, riding hard toward them. What happened next unfolded so quickly that Sarah could scarcely process it all. The rider, a mountain of a man with shoulder-length dark hair streaming behind him, came alongside the stagecoach at a full gallop. He shouted something up to Pete, his voice deep and commanding, audible even over the cacophony of hooves and wheels. Pete's response was immediate. Instead of slowing, he suddenly veered the entire team to the left, off the established road, and into the scrub-covered terrain. The bandits fired their rifles, the reports echoing off the rock formations. But the mountain man had positioned himself between the stagecoach and the gunman, his own rifle already in hand. Sarah felt the coach lurch and bounce violently as Pete urged the horses into terrain they were never meant to traverse at such speed. She was thrown against the side panel, her shoulders striking hard enough to bring tears to her eyes, but she barely noticed. She was too focused on the figure outside, the man who had somehow decided their lives were worth risking his own. The mountain man fired twice, not aiming to kill as far as Sarah could tell, but rather to scatter the bandits and give the stagecoach the precious seconds it needed. His horse, a powerful buckskin gelding, moved with the practiced ease of an animal accustomed to rough country and rougher situations. The man himself rode as though he and the horse were one creature, his muscular frame perfectly balanced, his movements fluid and sure. Pete guided the team around the rock formation, taking a wide arc that added precious distance between them and their would-be attackers. The bandits gave chase, but the mountain man had anticipated this. He wheeled his horse around, fired again, and this time Sarah saw one of the bandits pitch backward in his saddle, clearly hit, though she could not tell how seriously. The other 3 pulled up short, apparently deciding that 4 against 1, when that one was so clearly capable, was not odds they favored. The stagecoach bounced and rattled for another half-mile before Pete finally began to slow the lathered, heaving horses. Sarah's heart was still racing, her hands shaking as she tried to smooth her disheveled hair and compose herself. The whiskey drummer was muttering prayers under his breath, his face pale as milk. When the coach finally rolled to a stop in a small clearing surrounded by juniper trees, Sarah practically fell out the door in her haste to reach solid ground. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to stand upright, to maintain some semblance of dignity, despite the terror that still coursed through her veins. The mountain man rode up moments later, his buckskin horse barely winded despite the exertion. Now that Sarah could see him properly, she felt her breath catch for an entirely different reason. He was enormous, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His arms, visible beneath the rolled sleeves of his worn cotton shirt, were corded with muscle, his hands large and capable looking on the reins. His face was ruggedly handsome, all strong lines and sharp angles, with a dark beard that was neatly trimmed despite his obvious wilderness lifestyle. But it was his eyes that held her attention, pale blue like a winter sky, intelligent and assessing as they swept over the scene before him. He dismounted with the easy grace of a man completely comfortable in his own skin, his boots hitting the ground with solid thuds. Pete was already climbing down from the driver's seat, his weathered face split in a wide grin. "Ryder Callahan, you son of a gun!" Pete exclaimed, clasping the younger man's forearm in a grip that spoke of old friendship. "Thought we were done for back there. How in blazes did you happen along at just the right moment?" Ryder Callahan's deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Was tracking that group for the better part of 2 days. They hit a ranch north of here 3 nights back, killed a man and stole his horses. Sheriff asked if I would see what I could find." His gaze moved to Sarah, and she felt the intensity of his attention like a physical touch. "Madam, you hurt?" Sarah shook her head, not trusting her voice quite yet. She was still trying to reconcile the violence she had just witnessed with the careful courtesy in his tone. "Shoulder took a knock, but nothing serious," she finally managed, her voice steadier than she had expected. "Thank you. That was the bravest thing I have ever seen." Something flickered in those pale eyes, though whether it was pleasure at her compliment or discomfort with the praise, she could not tell. "Just doing what needed doing," he said simply. He turned back to Pete. "Those men are still out there. This trail loops back to the main road about 3 miles ahead, but I would not put it past them to try to cut you off. I will ride with you into Santa Fe. Make sure you get there without further trouble." "Appreciated," Pete said, already checking over his horses. "These animals need water and rest before we push on, though. That run took it out of them." Ryder nodded and began tending to his own horse, running his large hands over the buckskin's legs, checking for any signs of injury with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his imposing physicality. Sarah found herself watching him, fascinated by the contrast between his obvious strength and the care with which he handled his mount. The whiskey drummer emerged from the coach, still pale and shaking. "Are they coming back? Should we not keep moving?" "Horses need rest or they will founder," Ryder said without looking up. "Then we would be sitting ducks for certain. Better to take 20 minutes here where we have cover and good sight lines than to push on and end up stranded in the open." The logic was sound, and even the drummer seemed to recognize it, though he looked far from happy about the delay. He retreated back into the coach, presumably to fortify himself with more of his liquid courage. Sarah, however, remained outside. The high desert air was warm but not oppressive, and after the terrifying close quarters of the stagecoach during their wild flight, she welcomed the open space. She walked a short distance away, ostensibly to stretch her legs, but in truth she needed a moment to process what had happened. She could have died today. The realization hit her with delayed force, making her knees weak. If not for the intervention of a stranger, she might be lying dead on that road right now, or worse, taken by those bandits to some unknown fate. The carefully laid plans for her new life in Santa Fe, her dreams of opening a small school for children, all of it could have ended before it truly began. "You all right?" She had not heard Ryder approach, testament to how lost she had been in her own thoughts. He stood a respectful distance away, his expression concerned but not intrusive. Up close, she could see the small scars that marked his hands and forearms, evidence of a life spent in harsh conditions. He smelled of leather and horse and wood smoke. Not unpleasant at all, just entirely different from the cologne-drenched gentleman she had known back in Kansas City. "I am," she said, and meant it. "Just needed a moment. It all happened so fast." "Usually does," he agreed. He pulled a canteen from his belt and offered it to her. "Drink, helps with the shakes." Sarah accepted the canteen gratefully, taking a long swallow of cool water. Her hands were indeed shaking, she noticed with some embarrassment. "Is it always like that for you?" The danger, I mean? Ryder's expression was thoughtful as he gazed out at the surrounding landscape. Comes with the territory, I suppose. I've been living in these mountains for near about 8 years now. Trap in the winter, scout for the army sometimes, do odd jobs for folks who need help. It is not always dangerous, but when it is, you learn to move fast and think faster. Where are you from originally? Sarah found herself curious about this man who had appeared like something out of a dime novel, all heroic action and quiet competence. Montana originally. My pa was a fur trader, ma was Shoshone. They died when I was 14, so I have been on my own since then. Wandered south and found I liked this country well enough to stay. He said it matter-of-factly, without any hint of self-pity, but Sarah's heart ached for the boy he must have been, alone in an unforgiving world. I'm sorry for your loss, she said softly. He shrugged those massive shoulders. It was a long time ago. What brings you out to New Mexico territory, if you do not mind my asking? Sarah smiled, surprising herself. Freedom, I suppose. My family had very specific ideas about what my life should look like, and those ideas did not include anything I actually wanted. So I took what money I had and decided to make my own way. I am planning to start a school in Santa Fe. Interest sparked in those pale eyes. That so? Town could use a good school. The one they have now is just some old prospector who teaches when he's not too drunk to stand. Children deserve better. That's what I think as well, Sarah said, warming to the topic. Education should not be a luxury, and certainly should not be dependent on whether the teacher happens to be sober that day. They talked for a few more minutes, standing in the dappled shade of the juniper trees, and Sarah felt something unexpected unfurling in her chest. Ryder Callahan was unlike any man she had ever met. There was no artifice to him, no posturing or preening. He simply was, solid and real and utterly himself. When he looked at her, she felt truly seen in a way that had nothing to do with her appearance or her potential value as a wife. Pete called out that the horses were ready, breaking the spell of the moment. Ryder nodded and began walking back toward his buckskin. Sarah followed, oddly reluctant to end their conversation. The journey into Santa Fe resumed, with Ryder riding alongside the stagecoach, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain for any sign of threat. Sarah found herself watching him through the window more often than was probably proper, but she could not seem to help herself. The way he sat his horse, the careful attention he paid to his surroundings, even the way the afternoon light caught in his dark hair, all of it drew her eye like a moth to flame. They encountered no further trouble, and as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the adobe buildings of Santa Fe came into view. The town was nestled in a valley, with the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rising dramatically behind it. It was smaller than Sarah had expected, but possessed a certain charm with its Spanish colonial architecture and bustling central plaza. The stagecoach rolled to a stop in front of the stage office, and Sarah gathered her belongings, suddenly aware that this was where she and Ryder would part ways. The thought brought an unexpected pang of loss. Ryder dismounted and was there to help her down before Pete could even climb off his perch. His large hand was warm and steady as she placed her smaller one in it, and when her feet touched the ground, he did not immediately release her. Their eyes met, and Sarah saw her own reluctance reflected back at her. "Thank you again," she said, knowing the words were inadequate but not knowing what else to say. "You saved my life today." "Glad I was there," he replied, his voice quiet. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he added, "Where will you be staying? Just so I know you are settled safe." "The hotel across the plaza, I believe. La Fonda. I have a reservation." Ryder nodded. "Good place, run by decent folks. If you need anything, I will be around town for a few days, making my report to the sheriff. After that, I have a cabin about 10 miles north, up in the hills." Sarah wanted to ask if she would see him again, but could not quite bring herself to be so forward. Instead, she simply thanked him once more and gathered her bags. Pete had unloaded her trunk, and she arranged for a boy to cart it to the hotel while she walked across the plaza, very conscious of Ryder's eyes on her back. La Fonda was indeed a pleasant establishment, with thick adobe walls that kept the interior cool and a lovely courtyard garden. The proprietress, a round Mexican woman named Senora Martinez, welcomed Sarah warmly and showed her to a small but clean room on the second floor. From her window, Sarah could see the plaza and, if she leaned just right, catch a glimpse of the stage office. She told herself she was not looking to see if Ryder was still there. She told herself the flutter in her chest when she spotted his tall form standing beside his horse was simply residual excitement from the day's events. She told herself a lot of things, but deep down she knew the truth. Something had passed between her and the mountain man, some spark of connection that she had never felt with any of the supposedly suitable gentlemen her family had paraded before her. That night, Sarah lay in her bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her new home. Dogs barked in the distance, someone was playing a guitar, and the wind whispered through the eaves. She thought about Ryder Callahan, about his steady presence and quiet strength, about the way he had risked his life for strangers without hesitation. She wondered if their paths would cross again, and fell asleep, still wondering. The next morning, Sarah set about the practical business of establishing herself in Santa Fe. She visited the land office to inquire about available properties suitable for a school, introduced herself to several local business owners, and began to get a sense of the town's character. Santa Fe was a mix of cultures, with Mexican, Native, and Anglo-American residents living in relatively close proximity. There was a vitality to the place that Sarah found appealing, a sense that this was a community still defining itself. She was having lunch in the hotel dining room, reviewing her notes and planning her next steps when a shadow fell across her table. She looked up, fully expecting to see Senora Martinez, or perhaps another guest, and felt her heart skip when she saw Ryder standing there instead. He had cleaned up since yesterday, his hair damp as though recently washed, his shirt a clean if worn brown that brought out the blue of his eyes. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slightly, and Sarah realized with some surprise that he was nervous. "Miss Kinsley," he said, his deep voice carrying that same quiet courtesy she remembered. "I hope I am not intruding. I was wondering if I might have a word." "Of course," Sarah said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Please, sit." He folded his large frame into the chair, which seemed suddenly small and delicate beneath his bulk. "I spoke with the sheriff this morning, gave him my report on those bandits. He's putting together a posse to track them down proper, so I'm not needed for that. I will be heading back to my cabin tomorrow." Sarah felt a sinking disappointment, but kept her expression neutral. "I see. But before I go, I wanted to check that you were settled all right. Santa Fe is a good town, but it can be rough around the edges for a woman on her own. If you run into any trouble, Sheriff Morrison is a fair man. You can trust him." "Thank you," Sarah said. "That's very kind of you to think of my welfare." Ryder looked down at his hat, then back up at her, and Sarah saw something vulnerable in his expression. "Truth is, I have been thinking about you since yesterday, about what you said, about starting a school. That takes courage, coming out here alone, building something from nothing. No more courage than living in the mountains alone, tracking dangerous men," Sarah countered gently. A small smile touched his lips. "Maybe. But I was thinking, if you need help with anything, getting your school set up, I'm handy with tools, could help with repairs or building, whatever you need, would not charge you. Just seems like a worthwhile thing, education for children." Sarah felt warmth bloom in her chest. "I would appreciate that very much. I've not secured a property yet, but once I do, I am certain there will be work to be done." They talked for a while longer, and Sarah found herself relaxing into the conversation in a way she rarely did with people she had only just met. Ryder had a way of listening that made her feel heard, and though he was not an especially talkative man, when he did speak, his words carried weight and sincerity. Eventually, other diners began arriving for the lunch service, and Ryder stood to leave. But before he went, he said, "Would you allow me to show you around town properly? There are some places you should know about, stores with fair prices, folks who will deal straight with you. If you have the time, that is." "I would like that very much," Sarah said, not caring that her eagerness was probably showing. "When?" "This afternoon? Say around 3? We could walk over to the plaza. I could introduce you to some folks." 3 o'clock? Sounds perfect." After he left, Sarah sat for a moment, a smile playing at her lips. Senora Martinez appeared at her elbow, refilling her coffee with a knowing expression. "That's a good man, that one. Quiet, but good. I have known him 3 years now, and he's never been anything but honorable." "How often does he come to town?" Sarah asked, trying to sound casual. Once a month, sometimes twice. Brings in furs to trade, buys supplies, does odd jobs for folks who need help. He has a reputation as someone who can be counted on. Senora Martinez paused, then added with a twinkle in her eye, "And every unmarried woman in town has tried to catch his interest without success. He is polite to all but attached to none." Sarah absorbed this information, unsure what to make of it. She was not looking for romance, she reminded herself. She had come to Santa Fe to build a life of independence, not to trade one set of expectations for another. But even as she thought it, she knew her heart was already half lost to the mountain man with the gentle eyes and protective nature. That afternoon, Ryder arrived at exactly 3 o'clock, demonstrating a punctuality Sarah had not expected. They walked through Santa Fe together, and Ryder proved an excellent guide. He introduced her to the owner of the dry goods store, an elderly Anglo man named Mr. Patterson, who gave fair prices and honest measure. They stopped at a Mexican bakery where the bread was fresh and cheap, and at a small cantina where the proprietor, a woman named Rosa, welcomed Sarah warmly and promised to look out for her. As they walked, Sarah became aware of the attention Ryder attracted. People greeted him respectfully, and more than a few young women looked at him with undisguised interest, though he seemed oblivious to their attention. He stayed close to Sarah, his large presence protective without being overbearing, and she found she liked the feeling of being looked after, even as she cherished her independence. They ended their tour at the edge of town, where a small adobe building stood empty, its yard overgrown with weeds but its structure seemingly sound. Sarah stopped, studying it with interest. It was the right size for a schoolhouse with enough room for desks and a teaching area, and there was even a small attached room that could serve as her living quarters. "What is this place?" she asked. "Used to be a trading post, but the owner died last year and his family is back in St. Louis. I heard in town this morning that it is up for sale or lease." Ryder walked around the building, examining it with a practiced eye. Structure looks solid. Roof needs work, windows need replacing, but the bones are good. Adobe lasts forever if it is maintained proper. Sarah's mind was already racing ahead, imagining the space transformed into a proper school. "I wonder what they are asking for it." "Land office would know. Want me to go with you tomorrow to find out?" She turned to look at him, this man who was essentially a stranger, but who felt like so much more. "You have already done so much for me. I cannot keep imposing on your time." Ryder's expression was serious. "It is not an imposition, Sarah. I want to help if you will let me." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his deep rumble of a voice did strange things to her heart. "Then yes," she said softly. "I would very much appreciate your company tomorrow." The next morning, they met at the land office, and Sarah learned that the building could be leased with an option to buy. The terms were reasonable, within her budget if she was careful, and the agent assured her that the owner's family was motivated to see the property occupied and maintained. By noon, Sarah had signed a lease agreement and held the keys to her future school in her trembling hands. Ryder had stood quietly beside her through the entire process, his presence steadying, and when she emerged from the land office, she was surprised to find her eyes damp with tears. "You all right?" he asked, concerned. "More than all right," she assured him, laughing a little at herself. "I am just overwhelmed. 2 days ago I was on a stagecoach hoping I had made the right decision in coming here, and now I have a school. Or I will, once it is fixed up." "About that," Ryder said. "I told you I am handy with tools, and I meant it. But I know a few other men who owe me favors, good workers. If you can cover materials, I can probably get the labor done without too much cost." Sarah looked up at him, at this man who kept giving without asking anything in return. "Why are you doing all this? We barely know each other." Ryder was quiet for a long moment, his pale eyes searching her face. "Because you matter," he said finally, simply. "Because what you are trying to do matters, and because I have not been able to stop thinking about you since I first saw you step out of that stagecoach." Sarah's breath caught. The honesty in his words, the vulnerability in his expression, it struck something deep within her. "I've been thinking about you too," she admitted. "I keep telling myself it is too fast, too sudden, but I cannot seem to help it." "Do not have to put a name to it," Ryder said. Do not have to rush into anything, but I would like to keep seeing you if you are willing. Help with your school, get to know you proper, see where it leads. It was perhaps the most sensible, honest proposition Sarah had ever received. No flowery declarations, no grand gestures, just a simple desire to see what might grow between them. I would like that very much, she said. Over the following weeks, Sarah fell into a routine that was both exhausting and exhilarating. Every morning she would go to her building and work on cleaning and planning. Ryder appeared most days, true to his word, and began tackling the repairs. He replaced rotten sections of the roof, installed new windows he had somehow acquired for a fraction of their usual cost, and repaired the sagging door frames. True to his promise, he also brought friends. There was a carpenter named Jack, who owed Ryder for tracking down his stolen mules, and a stonemason called Diego, who Ryder had once saved from a flash flood. These men worked cheerfully, accepting Sarah's thanks and the modest lunches she prepared, but refusing any payment beyond materials. As the building transformed, so too did Sarah's relationship with Ryder. They worked side by side, their conversations ranging from the practical to the philosophical. She learned that despite his lack of formal education, Ryder was widely read, having taught himself from books traded at various posts over the years. He learned that Sarah had a wry sense of humor and a stubborn streak that matched his own. There were moments of connection that went beyond friendship. The brush of his hand against hers when they both reached for the same tool, the way his eyes followed her across a room, the careful concern in his voice when she climbed a ladder despite his protests that he should do it instead. Small things, but they accumulated like snow on a mountainside, building toward something inevitable. One evening, nearly a month after their first meeting, they sat together on the newly repaired steps of the school, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. The building was nearly ready. Desks had been acquired, some donated by families in town who had heard about the new school, others purchased with Sarah's carefully hoarded funds. She had posted notices around town announcing that classes would begin in 2 weeks. "You did it," Ryder said, his shoulder close enough to hers that she could feel his warmth. "School is ready." "We did it," Sarah corrected. "I could never have managed this without you." "You would have found a way. You are the most determined woman I have ever met." Sarah laughed softly. "I will take that as a compliment." It was meant as one. Ryder turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made her heart race. "Sarah, I need to say something, and I need you to know I mean it true. This past month, getting to know you, watching you build something beautiful out of nothing, it has meant more to me than I can rightly express. I think I am falling in love with you. Maybe already have fallen, truth be told." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "Ryder, I feel the same way. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a short time, but what I feel for you is real. It is the most real thing I have ever experienced." He reached out, his large hand cupping her cheek with infinite gentleness. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes," she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, warm and soft and perfect. It was a kiss full of promise, of possibility, of all the tomorrows they might share. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Sarah rested her forehead against his and smiled. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you start your school, show these children what a real teacher looks like, and I court you proper, with respect and patience, and somewhere down the line, if you will have me, I ask you to be my wife." Sarah's smile widened. "I think I would like that very much." The school opened to great success. Sarah had 15 students that first day, ranging in age from 6 to 14, and by the end of the first week, 3 more had joined. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and history, but also encouraged her students to ask questions, to think critically, to believe in their own potential. It was everything she had dreamed of and more. Ryder continued to be a steady presence in her life. He courted her as he had promised, with respect and patience. He would ride into town every few days, always bringing small gifts, a book he thought she might enjoy, wildflowers from the mountain meadows, a beautifully carved wooden frame for the map she had hung in the schoolroom. They took walks together in the evenings, attended church socials, and gradually became known as a couple in Santa Fe. Sarah met the challenges of her new life with determination. There were parents who questioned whether a woman, and an outsider at that, should be teaching their children. There were financial worries when the modest fees she charged did not quite cover her expenses. There were difficult students who tested her patience and her creativity. But through it all, Ryder was there, offering support without trying to solve her problems for her, believing in her capability while making it clear he would catch her if she fell. Winter came to Santa Fe, bringing cold nights and occasional snow that dusted the adobe buildings and made the plaza look like something from a storybook. The school thrived despite the weather, the thick adobe walls keeping the interior warm with the help of a wood stove that Ryder kept supplied with fuel. It was on a clear December evening, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet, that Ryder asked Sarah to come with him to his cabin for the first time. She had been curious about his home, this place he spoke of with such affection, and she accepted readily, making arrangements for a neighbor to check on the school while she was gone. The ride up into the mountains took several hours, following narrow trails that wound through pine forests and across rushing streams. Sarah rode a gentle mare Ryder had borrowed from a friend, and he stayed close beside her, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the country they passed through. His cabin, when they finally reached it, took her breath away. It was larger than she had expected, built of logs with a stone chimney and a wide porch that looked out over a valley. The interior was clean and well organized, with handmade furniture that showed real craftsmanship, shelves lined with books and furs and hides hanging on the walls. It was a home, not just a shelter, and Sarah could feel Ryder's personality in every corner. "It is beautiful," she said, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "Ryder, this is truly beautiful." He looked pleased but also nervous, she realized. "I wanted you to see it," he said. "Wanted you to understand what my life is like up here. It is peaceful, but it is isolated. Nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. In winter, I can go weeks without seeing another person. I needed you to know that before I ask what I'm about to ask." Sarah's heart began to pound. She turned to face him fully and saw him reach into his pocket and pull out a small object. When he opened his hand, she saw a ring, simple but lovely, a silver band with a small turquoise stone. "Sarah Kinsley," Ryder said, his voice rough with emotion, "you have changed my life in ways I never expected. Before I met you, I was content with my solitude, or I thought I was. But you have shown me what I was missing. The joy of sharing my days with someone who understands me, who challenges me, who makes me want to be a better man. I love you with everything I have, and I am asking if you will marry me. I know your school is important to you, and I would never ask you to give that up. We can figure out the details, splitting time between here and town, whatever makes sense. I just need to know if you will be my wife." Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks. She had known this was coming, had hoped for it. But hearing the actual words, seeing the love and hope in his eyes, it overwhelmed her in the best possible way. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Ryder, I will marry you. I love you so much, and I want nothing more than to spend my life with you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms, and they held each other while the fire crackled in the hearth and the wind whispered through the pines outside. They talked long into the night, making plans for their future. Sarah would continue teaching, at least through the end of the school year. They would marry in the spring, giving them time to prepare and to help her students and their families adjust to the changes. Ryder would spend more time in town, taking on work that kept him closer to Santa Fe rather than ranging far into the mountains. During summer break, Sarah would come to the cabin, and they would have those months together in the high country Ryder loved. It was not a conventional arrangement by any means, but it suited them, two people who had both chosen lives outside convention. They were married in April of 1879 on a bright morning when the cottonwoods along the Santa Fe River were just beginning to leaf out. The ceremony was held in the small church on the plaza, with what seemed like half the town in attendance. Sarah wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk that Senora Martinez had helped her make, and Ryder wore a new shirt and trousers, though he had drawn the line at a tie, much to Sarah's amusement. Sheriff Morrison stood up with Ryder, and Rosa from the cantina stood with Sarah. When Ryder said his vows, his deep voice steady and sure, promising to love and cherish her all the days of his life, Sarah thought her heart might burst from happiness. And when she made her own promises, looking up into those pale blue eyes that had first captured her attention so many months ago, she meant every word with a fierceness that surprised her. Their first year of marriage was an adventure in compromise and cooperation. They established a rhythm, with Ryder spending several days each week in town, working as a scout for the army or doing carpentry and other odd jobs, then returning to his cabin to hunt and trap. Sarah finished the school year to great acclaim, several of her students showing remarkable progress, and one of the older boys even expressing interest in attending a proper academy someday. In summer, as planned, Sarah closed the school and went to live with Ryder in the mountain cabin. It was a revelation to her, this life so different from anything she had known. She learned to fish in the cold streams, to identify edible plants and animal tracks, to read the weather in the clouds. Ryder was a patient teacher, never making her feel inadequate for her city upbringing, always encouraging her curiosity. But more than the skills she learned, it was the intimacy of those summer days that Sarah treasured. Waking up beside her husband in the cool mountain mornings, watching him work with quiet efficiency around the cabin, sitting together on the porch at sunset discussing everything and nothing. She had never felt more herself than in those moments, more completely known and accepted. They talked about children, both agreeing they wanted them, but deciding to wait a bit longer. Sarah wanted to establish her school more firmly, to train someone who could take over when she eventually needed to step back. Ryder wanted to build an addition onto the cabin, creating more space for a growing family. They were in no rush. They had found each other, and that was enough for now. The second school year was even more successful than the first. Word had spread about the quality of Sarah's teaching, and she had to turn away students for lack of space. The problem was solved when several local businessmen, impressed by what she had accomplished, offered to fund an expansion of the schoolhouse. Ryder oversaw the construction, working alongside the hired carpenters to ensure everything was done to exacting standards. It was during this construction, in the fall of 1880, that Sarah began to feel the telltale signs that her body was changing. She waited to be certain, then shared the news with Ryder one evening as they lay together in bed at the little apartment they now rented above a shop in Santa Fe. "I'm pregnant," she said simply, watching his face for his reaction. Ryder went completely still, then his face split into the widest smile she had ever seen. Truly, I'm about 2 months along, I think. The baby should come in late May." He pulled her close, his large hand spread protectively over her still flat belly. "We're going to have a child," he said wonderingly. "Sarah, we're going to be parents." The months that followed were a blend of joy and practical preparation. Sarah continued teaching as long as she was able, finally stepping back in late April when the weight of pregnancy made standing for long periods uncomfortable. She had trained a young woman named Emily to assist her, and Emily proved more than capable of taking over the final weeks of the school year. Their son was born on a warm May evening in 1881, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. Ryder was there for the birth, holding Sarah's hand through the long hours of labor, his face pale but determined. When the midwife finally placed the baby in his arms, Sarah saw tears streaking down her husband's bearded cheeks. "He is perfect," Ryder whispered, staring down at the tiny red-faced infant. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas after Ryder's father, with the middle name James for Sarah's grandfather. Tommy, as they quickly began calling him, proved to be a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's auburn hair. Sarah took the next school year off, devoting herself to motherhood while Emily ran the school under her supervision. It was a different kind of fulfillment than teaching, but no less meaningful. She loved watching Ryder with their son, the way his large hands were so gentle as he cradled the tiny body, the wonder in his eyes, as Tommy grew and changed. That summer, they went to the cabin as a family. Ryder had completed the addition, creating a proper bedroom for themselves and a small nursery for Tommy. The cabin felt like a real home now, filled with the sounds of a baby's laughter and a couple's quiet contentment. As Tommy grew from infant to toddler, Sarah gradually returned to teaching, though she now worked only part-time with Emily as her full partner. The school continued to thrive, and they began discussions about opening a second location on the other side of town to meet the growing demand. Life settled into a comfortable pattern over the next several years. Sarah and Ryder welcomed a daughter in 1884, a beautiful girl they named Margaret after Sarah's mother, though she was known to everyone as Maggie. Where Tommy was serious and thoughtful like his father, Maggie was all fire and energy, keeping her parents constantly on their toes. The family split their time between town and the cabin, with the children learning to love both places. Tommy showed an early aptitude for tracking and woodcraft, following his father around like a small shadow whenever they were in the mountains. Maggie, meanwhile, loved books and learning, often sitting in on her mother's classes and absorbing everything like a small sponge. In 1887, Sarah gave birth to another son, whom they named Daniel. He was a cheerful, easygoing baby who seemed perfectly content wherever he happened to be, and his arrival completed their family in a way that felt absolutely right. The years passed with the particular blend of sameness and change that marks a happy family life. The children grew, the schools expanded, and Sarah and Ryder deepened into each other, their love maturing into something richer and more complex than the passionate certainty of their early days. There were challenges, of course. Maggie became seriously ill with fever when she was 4, and for a terrifying week they thought they might lose her. But she pulled through, her resilient nature asserting itself. Tommy struggled with reading for years before Sarah realized he was seeing letters differently than other children, and she developed special techniques to help him learn. Daniel proved to be prone to misadventure, giving them several heart-stopping moments as he climbed too high or wandered too far. But through it all, Sarah and Ryder faced everything together. They had built a life that honored both of their needs, both of their dreams, and they had created a family that reflected the best of both of them. In the spring of 1895, Sarah stood on the porch of the mountain cabin, watching her nearly grown children help their father repair a fence that had been damaged in a late storm. Tommy, now 14, worked alongside Ryder with the easy competence of someone who had been learning these skills his entire life. Maggie, 11, was handing them tools and offering commentary that made them both laugh. Daniel, 8, was supposed to be helping, but was mostly playing with the family's dog, a mutt they had adopted as a puppy several years earlier. Sarah rested her hand on her belly, feeling the flutter of the new life growing there. Yes, after 8 years, she was pregnant again, a surprise but a welcome one. She and Ryder had looked at each other in shock when she had first realized, then had dissolved into laughter at the idea of starting over with a baby at their ages. Sarah was now 39, Ryder 42, but they were healthy and strong and still very much in love. Ryder looked up as if sensing her gaze, and his face softened into the smile he reserved just for her. He said something to the children, then walked over to the porch, climbing the steps to stand beside her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "Everything," Sarah said honestly. "That day on the stagecoach when you saved my life, the terror I felt, and then seeing you for the first time. How could I have known that moment would lead to all of this?" "Best day of my life," Ryder said. "Well, one of them anyway. Got a lot of competition now." Sarah laughed and leaned into his solid warmth. "Do you ever regret it? Giving up your solitude? Taking on all this chaos?" "Not for one single second." He turned her to face him, his large hands gentle on her shoulders. "Sarah, you gave me everything I did not even know I wanted. A purpose beyond just surviving, a family, a reason to come home. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Even the part where Maggie nearly burned down the cabin trying to make surprise breakfast? Even that, Ryder confirmed, though his lips twitched with amusement at the memory. "Though I could do without repeating the time Daniel decided to bring a skunk home as a pet." They stood together on the porch, watching their children and looking out over the valley spread below them. In the distance, the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rose against the impossibly blue New Mexico sky, their peaks still touched with snow. "We did good, did we not?" Sarah said softly. "We did," Ryder agreed. "We really did." The baby, another girl they would name Catherine, was born in December of 1895, arriving early but healthy. The children were enchanted with their tiny sister, even Tommy, who had been worried that he was too old to care about a baby, but found himself completely charmed by the small creature. Sarah returned to teaching after Catherine was born, but now as the administrator of what had become a small network of schools across Santa Fe. Emily ran the day-to-day operations, and a staff of 6 teachers handled the actual instruction. Sarah's dream of education for all children who wanted it had grown beyond anything she had imagined that day she first signed the lease on a run-down adobe building. As for Ryder, he had gradually transitioned from trapping and scouting to working as a guide for wealthy hunters and tourists who wanted to experience the wilderness with someone who knew it intimately. It was work he enjoyed, less dangerous than his earlier pursuits, but still allowing him to spend time in the country he loved, and it paid well enough that Sarah no longer had to worry about whether the school's modest fees would cover expenses. The turn of the century found the Callahan family prosperous and content. Tommy had apprenticed with a surveyor and was learning a trade that would serve him well. Maggie had announced her intention to become a teacher like her mother, much to Sarah's delight. Daniel had decided he wanted to be a veterinarian after reading about them in a book, and was already spending his free time helping the local farrier. Catherine, at 4 years old, was the darling of the entire family, bright and curious and utterly fearless. On a warm June evening in 1901, Sarah and Ryder sat together on the newly expanded porch of their cabin, watching the sun paint the western sky in shades of gold and rose. The children were all in town with various friends, giving their parents a rare evening alone. 22 years, Sarah said, marveling. Can you believe it has been 22 years since that day on the Stagecoach? Ryder took her hand, his thumb rubbing gently over her knuckles. His hair was now heavily streaked with silver, his beard entirely gray, but his eyes were the same striking blue they had always been, and his body was still strong and capable. Best 22 years of my life, he said, and I'm looking forward to the next 22 just as much. You think we will get another 22? Sarah asked. Her own hair was now more gray than auburn, and her face showed the lines of a life well lived, but her eyes still sparkled with the same intelligence and humor that had first attracted Ryder. I am planning on it, Ryder said firmly. Got too much left to do. Got to see Tommy marry that girl he's been courting. Got to help Maggie get her teaching certificate. Got to watch Daniel go off to veterinary school. Got to walk Catherine down the aisle someday, though that's a long way off yet, thank goodness, Sarah laughed. And probably more grandchildren than we can count. Looking forward to that too, Ryder admitted. Being able to spoil them and then hand them back to their parents sounds pretty good to me. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of the forest. An owl called somewhere in the distance, and closer by, a nightjar sang its distinctive song. I never thanked you properly, Sarah said suddenly. For what? For that day. For seeing those bandits and deciding to do something about it, for risking your life for a stagecoach full of strangers. If you had not been there, if you had just ridden past, none of this would exist. Our children would never have been born. I would not have my schools. We would not have this life we have built together. Ryder was quiet for a moment, then said, I like to think that we would have found each other somehow. The two people meant to be together will find a way no matter what. But I am grateful every day that I was there, that I got to you in time, that we got this chance. He pulled her close, and Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, perfectly content. This was what love looked like, she thought, not the grand gestures of storybooks, though those had their place, but this, the quiet comfort of sitting together at the end of the day, the shared history of decades, the absolute certainty that no matter what came, they would face it together. Years continued to pass, bringing the joys and sorrows that life inevitably holds. Tommy married his sweetheart, a lovely girl named Rebecca, and they gave Sarah and Ryder their first grandchild in 1903, a boy they named Ryder after his grandfather. Maggie earned her teaching certificate and took a position at one of Sarah's schools, proving to be every bit as gifted an educator as her mother. Daniel did indeed go to veterinary school in Denver, the first of their children to leave New Mexico for any extended period. It was hard watching him go, but Sarah and Ryder were proud of his determination to pursue his dream. He returned after finishing his training and set up practice in Santa Fe, quickly becoming known as someone with a special touch with animals. Catherine grew into a beautiful young woman, with her mother's intelligence and her father's love of the outdoors. She was the last of their children to leave the nest, marrying a young rancher in 1913 when she was 18. It was a good match, and Sarah could see that her youngest daughter was deeply in love. By 1915, Sarah and Ryder were in their late 50s, their hair fully gray, their bodies showing the wear of active lives. But they were still healthy, still engaged with their community, and still deeply in love. They had 7 grandchildren now, with another on the way, and the old cabin rang with laughter whenever the whole family gathered. One evening, sitting on that same porch where they had shared so many important moments, Ryder said, "You know what I think about sometimes?" "What?" Sarah asked, setting aside the book she'd been reading in the fading light. "That moment when I first saw you step out of that stagecoach. You were disheveled and scared and trying so hard to be brave, and I thought to myself, that is the strongest woman I have ever seen. I did not know it yet, but I think I started falling in love with you right then." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Even after all these years, Ryder could still surprise her with his tenderness. "I fell in love with you when you asked if I was hurt. The way you looked at me, like I was a real person worthy of concern, not just a proper lady to be helped. You saw me, the real me, from the very beginning." "Still see you," Ryder said. "Still fall in love with you a little bit more every day." They held hands as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. 2 people who had beaten the odds and built something lasting.